Hey guys, this is another 6th grade heritage studies, cultural geography, ancient civ video from Coach Goodrich. This is actually the beginning of our Unit 6. Unit 6 deals with Mesoamerica or Central America and Africa. I'm recording the first part of this a little bit later than I did the second part, so I'm going to try to squeeze all of this in. So I'm probably going to be going pretty quick. Make sure you have your Unit 6 notes out and ready to fill out as we're working through it. Your essential questions. What was the overall impact that colonization had on the native Mesoamericans as a whole, and how did Christianity make its way to Africa in the 300 AD? Those time periods. So please go and pause the video, write these down, and then resume it when you are done. Alright, here we go. Mesoamerica. Talking about the Central American regions right here. We're really going to be focusing mainly on the Mexican regions. Not going to talk so much about the Incans in the south. We'll hit on them a little bit, but we're going to be focusing on the Olmecs, the Mayans, and then finally the Aztecs, which are right in the central part of Mexico. There you go. This gives you a good region of what we're talking about. So Olmecs, Mayans more on the toe, and then right here, you are what are going to be called the Mexica, or the Aztecs as they're more generally known. So that's a good little map right there for you. Alright, the other side of the world. This is going to be our first unit that talks about somewhere across the Atlantic Ocean, so a little bit closer to home for us in Florida. Thousands of miles away from Rome and Constantinople, where we left off our last unit, more civilizations are thriving, but they remain mostly undiscovered until the age of Columbus in 1492. Remember the song? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. These people are not primitive, despite what others may think about them, and have developed artists, mathematicians, and builders to rival those found in the Old World. It's just we did not discover them until much more later on in history. Many anthropologists, people who study the origins of man, speculate that there used to be a natural ice bridge between Russia and Alaska, which allowed ancient humans to travel from Asia to the Americas following the prey that they hunted. So an ice bridge, this is not that same ice bridge. This is actually found across one of the Great Lakes up north between the United States and Canada. But there's an ice, you see kind of an example of what that looks like. Now the one that they're talking about is called the Beringia Ice Bridge, named for the Bering Strait where it is located right now. And they speculated it was miles and miles wide and miles deep. And it just froze over and allowed people over hundreds of years to travel down to the different parts of what is now Canada and the United States, and eventually into Central America as well. The first of these three civilizations we're talking about are the Olmecs. The Olmecs are also known as the rubber people because they were the first to collect latex or rubber from different trees and vines down there and use it. The Olmec civilization is going to last from 1500 to 400 BC along the southern Gulf Coast of Mexico. The biggest cities were combined into an urban center called San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, not to be confused with the Aztec capital city of Tenochtitlan, which we'll talk about later, which possessed advanced water and drainage systems. The most famous findings are going to be the large stone heads carved out of stone, jade, and basalt, with some being as large as 40 tons. The Olmecs were also the first people to collect and use rubber, like I said, to waterproof shoes, make containers, and create rubber balls to place different sporting events with. Many of the Olmec beliefs and teachings were going to be passed on to later civilizations. It just modified slightly, so they're kind of seen as like the old way of doing things, and those ideas are going to find their way into the Mayans and eventually into the Aztec way of life as well. So once again, here we go, Olmecs, right here in the middle. These are some of the large stone heads. There have been hundreds of these discovered of varying sizes. It's amazing, but if you look around, there's not really any rock to carve it from, so we don't really know if they carved it somewhere else and then dragged it here, or if there used to be rocks here. But it looks like it's all carved out of one random piece of stone, kind of like the large stone heads that are found in the on the Easter Islands in the Pacific. One of the mysteries. So, and you can see right here an earthen temple or pyramid complex has been constructed. This leads into the next one, the Mayans. The Mayan civilization existed from about 250 to 900 AD, so more recent. They lived throughout the Yucatan Peninsula, which is like the toe, if you're looking at Mexico, and the part of the toe of the boot that forms Mexico, it's down there. And they lived in the high plateaus and the lowlands. They built many city-states that kind of ruled independently of one another. And the biggest city-state was Tikal, which had, in its heyday, had a population of 60,000, not 60,000, and stretched out for 47 miles. So Tikal is right here, in what is now Guatemala. It's a World Heritage Site. It's one of the most popular tourist destinations. A lot of cruises end up taking people there. They're sailing around the area in the Caribbean to go see it. And then this is what it looks like. You see the big, tall temples and structures that have been built up, the steep steps. Even so high as to poke above the trees. Now, some of this complex is going to be used during the early filmings and later filmings of the Star Wars series, where it's supposed to represent Yavin 4, which is where the Rebels have their base. So that's a little fun fact, if you're a Star Wars nerd like me. There you go. Some of the Mayan achievements. Art. In arts, literature, and architecture, they wrote hundreds of books in their language, but large temple pyramids had advanced irrigation systems for their crops, and they also built roads. Many of these works have been destroyed, but Diego de Landa, a Spanish priest, was managed to save and copy some of them for studying the culture later on. And then in math and astronomy, developed the idea of mathematical zero, studied the stars to come up with a very accurate calendar, and which they used to help predict future events. There's Diego de Landa. He's kind of seen as like kind of a two-faced guy. Yes, he is credited with destroying a lot of Mayan works, but also credited with saving a lot of works. So did some good things, some not so good things as well. And this is a Mayan calendar stone. So you would rotate it in accordance with the seasons, see where it ended up. Each one of these symbols stands for different dates and times and things like that. The Mayan calendar is most famous for ending, according to people, according to scholars, ending on 12/21/2012, December 21st, 2012, is where most Mayan calendars expire. So during that time period, now almost a decade ago, people had parties signifying, kind of like just got crazy because a lot of people thought or were just playing on the belief that was going to be the end of the world. They were wrong. Mayan social classes. The top level is going to be the king. Like in Egypt, the king was a god on earth. A lot of similarities between these Mesoamerican civilizations and the Egyptians in particular. The most famous king was Shasha-Chan-Kawil I. That's a mouthful. Who strengthened the city safe to call from 682 to 734. He's probably the most famous. Not necessarily because he did anything great, but he's one of the few that we have actually written records about. We have a couple monuments with some inscriptions. From what we've been able to decipher about him. So kind of like King Tut is famous not because he did anything great, but because he was the first major mummy to be found and closer to the modern era. Same kind of thing for Shasha. Next class down are going to be the priests, who are going to serve as teachers and doctors and fortune tellers, as well as the nobles who held government positions like advisors, and then the artists, architects, scribes, and merchants. Next class down are going to be the peasants, who grew and harvested food, would serve as foot soldiers and day laborers. At the very, very bottom, just like in many civilizations, are going to be your slaves, debtors, criminals, and POWs, prisoners of war. This is actually what is left of it. It's kind of worn down. It's just Shasha-Chan-Kawil the first, the famous pharaoh or famous king of Tikal. You got your social structures. The Mayan religion, everything had to be done according to a religious ritual, very ritualistic. The gods and spirits had to be appeased, word for satisfied, taken care of. And the way to do that was mainly through human blood. Everything had its own spirit or god. Mayans believed that the world rested on top of a crocodile god's back, and then after death, people either went to one of 9 underworlds, hells, or 13 heavens, paradises, each with their own specific gods. Unless you were a soldier who died in battle, a priest, or a human sacrifice, there was no guarantee of heaven. So death was kind of a terrifying prospect, even more so than what it is right now. After death, kings are going to be buried with their possessions, while commoners are going to be buried under their houses, which forced many families to move. Yes, some sacrifices. So right here. There's a breakdown of Tikal, what it looked like back then, with a major temple in the middle. sacrifice or kings right here being buried with his possessions, a lot of jade and turquoise beads. Mayan decline. Archaeologists have found recordings in Tikal from 869 AD that show the city and many others around it suddenly abandoned. Don't really know what happened. For 600 years, the Mayans would break off and live as part of other civilizations and cultures. Some archaeologists believe that either famine, war, or uprisings based off religious rituals forced the Mayans' culture to decline. A lot of their ideas are going to be picked up by the next group, the Aztecs. In the 1400s, ancient Americans moved to an area known as Mexico, to a lake area known as Lake Texcoco. We'll talk a little bit more about the legend of how that founded and the impact that it had on Mexican culture and the flag itself later on. The city was named Tenochtitlan, no relation to the Olmec city, and part of Mexico City has been built on this area. The Aztecs, literally building in the middle of a lake, constructed chinampas, floating gardens, and causeways, naturally forming and artificial bridges in order to provide for the city for transportation and for trade. By the early 1500s, the Aztecs either conquered or formed alliances with other cities in the area. Tenochtitlan grew to have a population of 200,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities of the ancient world. So the yellow area is the area that's going to be the Aztec Empire by 1518. It is very expansive, with Tenochtitlan almost smack dab in the middle. This is a above map going to be created by the Spanish explorers and conquistadors that are there. You see it's literally built like in a floating city, almost like Venice in Italy, in the middle with different causeways and land bridges connecting it together, with the Templo Mayor in the middle. Another view. Some of the chinampas, how they would look. And this is what it looks like today. Lake Texcoco has pretty much dried up since then. There are some spots where it is not. You see the large temples in the background, as well as in the foreground. Aztec religion, much like the Mayans, religion ritual ruled every part of Aztec life. The Templo Mayor was the main site for ceremonies and thousands of human sacrifices each year. In fact, the main point of combat, of war for the Aztecs, was not to kill the enemy, but to capture as many prisoners as possible in order to keep them for sacrifice. That's how you advance through the ranks. The more prisoners you caught, the higher ranks you could go. Like the Mayans, a king was a god on earth and the top of the social class system, followed by warriors, priests, and nobles, and then artisans, laborers, merchants, and farmers towards the bottom. The top ranking people in the Aztec army, kind of like our generals today, are jaguar warriors and eagle warriors, who had captured the most prisoners of war or slaves for human sacrifices in order to be promoted. Citizens were expected to help in the construction of dikes, temples, roads, and aqueducts. Aztecs would travel far into Central America to trade items like jaguar skins, rubber, feathers, cotton, and cacao for chocolate with other civilizations. They used hieroglyphics in order to keep records of business and used forms of numbers and astronomy that they borrowed from the Mayans. But because they didn't have horses or mules, those would come with the Spanish later on. They used canoes to trade items throughout the city. And I thought this was really cool right here. You can kind of get a comparison of what all of the different... We've got to go quick. Throughout the history of Central America, what the different symbols look like and what they mean on the side. Some pictographs, hieroglyphics. I got canoe. The last emperor of the Aztecs was Montezuma II, and he ruled from 1502 to 1520. The Spanish conquistadors, led by the conquistador Hernando Cortez, landed in Mexico in 1519 and made their way to Tenochtitlan, where they were treated like gods. However, they soon took Montezuma prisoner, held him as hostage, where he soon died, either in a riot by his own people or was killed and executed by the Spanish, allowing the Spanish to take full control. Cortez and his army, with their advanced weapons and gunpowder, easily overwhelmed the Aztec army and destroyed most of the city, leading to the end of the Aztecs. Montezuma, Cortez. The route Cortez took. Boom. And then please, go ahead and complete the mini quiz. And I look forward to discussing this with you guys a little bit later on.